What is up, you guys? Thank you for joining me today. Today we are talking all about the positive shadow. This is your call to a larger life. This is the life of meaning that we all want. This is the one that is bigger and more meaningful. This is what is wanting to be expressed through you. This is the universe saying, hey, you are my chosen messenger. There's nobody that can do it like you. And how can I use you to deliver my message and to positively impact other lives? The positive shadow comes with so much intimidation and fear, but on the other side of that is the life that you really, really want. It's the one that's meaningful, that is purposeful, that contributes. And that's what this episode is all about. I did not do a very good job of laying out the format in my episode, so I'll just do it here really quick. First, I talk about how the positive shadow is showing up in your life, how it's trying to pry into your life, what are some things that it's doing, things that, you can kind of latch onto and say, okay, well, I'm doing this, this, and this. Or I see this, this, and this showing up in my life, and maybe there's something underneath that. Maybe that's the positive shadow trying to be known. And then I talk about risk versus reward and why it's intimidating to know the positive shadow. Then I talk about some positive shadow archetypal messages. These are overarching themes that sort of appear in most people's lives, I would say. When the positive shadow is coming through, it's going to look unique and individual to you, but the overarching theme is going to be the same. And so if you kind of know what's coming, maybe you can pick that apart and identify where that's showing up for you and how it's showing up for you. Then I talk about character traits as manifestations of the positive shadow, meaning I just talk about what are some character traits that we can choose as the positive shadow. Namely, these are spontaneity, creativity, passion, and the ability to say, I am different than the rest of the world. When we choose these things on a normal day-to-day basis, what we do is we align ourselves a little bit at a time instead of trying to make that huge hurdle over into who we're supposed to be. It's more of a journey instead of just a actual event that happens and then it's done. Lastly, we talk about how to discover what's in your positive shadow. Of course, I couldn't leave you with this amazing message about the positive shadow without talking about some actionable steps. Some of these appear in question form. They're just questions that, you could ask yourself and maybe even journal about and kind of get to know your positive shadow a little bit more. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode as much as I did recording it. So without further ado, welcome to the Get Out of Your Head podcast, where we talk all about the stories that keep you stuck, blocked from manifesting what you really want, and away from your authentic life. I am your host, Sarah, from Spirit, Mind, Body. Hello, everyone. Welcome back if you are joining me again, and welcome if you are new. Today, I am talking all about the positive shadow. I'm actually very excited to do this episode because I think that we've been talking about the shadow for a few weeks now. And the shadow usually comes with a lot of heaviness because we have I think the prevailing idea is that in order to dig up shadow pieces of yourself or, in order to figure out what's in the shadow, we have to confront really painful memories. We might have to heal traumas that we really don't want to revisit. We have to be able and okay to see things about ourselves that we really don't want to know. And so generally speaking, all of that, we tend to put this negative label on the shadow, and it makes us, if you're kind of weird like I am, I'm drawn to it. But I think that's because I see the benefit in doing it. But I think that on first glance, it would be really easy to say, that's not really for me. I don't really want to do that. That looks really uncomfortable. And so the positive shadow, though, what we're going to be talking about today is all about the more positive side. And let me be clear, the positive shadow is still kind of things that your ego, I don't want to say you, because you implies a whole person, but I like to say the ego doesn't really want to know about itself. When I'm in ego, when I'm in that place of inflated personality, the person that I envision myself to be, the one that's fighting for survival at every moment of its life and trying to prove itself and, trying to say, hey, am I good enough, trying to fit in. The ego doesn't want you to know about the positive shadow because it's going to require some work, and we're going to get into that. So the positive shadow is really, it contains what your soul wishes you to become. This is your soul's agenda. This is a calling, a desire to create, to contribute, to be more meaningful, larger, something that's uniquely you. And as a coach, actually, this is exactly what I do, because I believe that in every moment of our lives, our soul is calling us to something more. And that's very unique to every individual. My more can be completely different than your more or somebody else's more. And by more, I want to be very clear here. It's not this overabundance kind of where we, just jam packing mindless things into our day. That's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about with more is larger, more meaningful, fuller, more whole. That's what I'm talking about. And so for you, that could look like repairing your relationship with your mom. For somebody else, that could be starting a business. For somebody else, that could be a call to parenthood or a call to being a more present parent. And I was thinking about this morning as I'm prepping for this episode, to record this episode. I see so many people, most of the people that I know in my life, actually, I think, we sort of have settled into this idea that we need to go to our mediocre jobs, and then we come home and we get our fixes of what makes us feel good, whether that's watching TV, having a drink, eating a really big supper, or eating in general, shopping, whatever our fix is. And then we go to sleep, and then we wake up and we do it all again. And usually maybe our sleep is disturbed because our soul has been calling us to do something else and we've been ignoring it. Or we're something like, there's something that happens that we're just feeling like there's got to be more. And then if we ignore it for so long and we keep settling into this monotony or this settling, I think that that's not the life that we're meant to live. We're meant to live, like, we're not put on this earth just to get through it. We're put on this earth to commune with it, to be present, to interact. And most of us, I'd say that we're generally watching our lives from the sidelines, and that's not what I think that we're meant to do. And so Carl Jung said that we all walk around in shoes that are a little too small for us. So when I coach or when I'm working with somebody, we are always going to address that thing. What are you being called to do, to become, to be? What is that pull in you? Because we all have a pull at every moment of our lives, and that pull, that is going to be the next step that leads us to the next step that leads us to the next step. And then we have to address what holds you back. And that's what I would say is the shadow. What's the shadowy aspect that's like kind of getting in the way of you pursuing that pull? And really, the wording gets a little tricky here because I guess it's all kind of shadowy. But if you think about the pull being the positive shadow, and then the blocks being the negative shadow, or the pull is like the spirit, and then the blocks are like the ego, right? There's kind of like, it's not a perfect analogy, it's not perfect language to use for this, but I think that it works generally, and I hope that you understand what I'm talking about. And so when you tap into that soul's calling, that draw, that pull towards whatever it is, that's who you were supposed to be. That's who you were always meant to be. And I think that as we sort of settle into our lives, as we go through school, maybe we got the house, the job, whatever, and we're kind of in it, we're settling into it. And we start to wake up every day and we think, oh my God, today is the same as yesterday. And tomorrow is going to be the same as the day before, right? We sort of lose sight of that. We sort of forget who we were meant to be. We sort of stop dreaming in a way. We stop participating in our lives, and we start to sit back and we're like, okay, well, I guess if this is all there is, then that's all there is. You have two options. You can either settle into that and accept that that's all there is, or you can do something about it, and you can start to get back to who you were really called to be, who you sort of forgot that you were. I think we have glimpses of this as a child, and then we just, through the conditioning and through other people's judgments and projections of them onto us, we sort of absorb that and we start to tell ourselves, oh no, that's not acceptable. in order to fit in, I can't do that. In order to be acceptable or in order to be liked, I have to be this person that they want me to be, right? And so your positive shadow is really the person without all of the judgments and the criticisms, the true authentic you, right? That's who you're being called to be. But that is intimidating in a way, because the reason that you left that in the first place, the reason that you said, okay, well, I really liked singing as a kid and I decided not to sing anymore because somebody told me I wasn't good enough or somebody made fun of me. The reason that you left that was so in order to fit in, and what you're going to have to do when you come into terms with your positive shadow is you're going to have to be okay with some people not liking that. Take this example, for instance. Say you loved singing as a kid and somebody made fun of you, and that was sort of like your personal trauma that you decided, okay, I'm not going to sing anymore. And the truth is, when you start to sing again, when you start to tap into that or do whatever you like to do as a child, in your adult life, there's generally nobody around that's still judging you. And if they do, okay, but those are few and far between. But it's that fear, that what if, that our ego just holds on to, that prevents us from making moves. So I want to talk about, how do you know when the positive shadow is sort of showing up and trying to pry or trying to make itself known in your life? There are some things that I've read that have kind of alluded to this, but I want to make sure that you know that if you're suffering any of these, or if you are seeing any of these things show up in your life, it's just an invitation. This is not law. I think I say that almost all the time, but it's not law. It's not gospel. It's my own personal opinion. And I think that if I share it with you and you can benefit, then great. So the way that I think that this positive shadow shows up is that we're all living out these scripts, kind of like I talked about before. We grow up, we get this message. This is who I'm supposed to be. This is how to be successful. This is how to be happy in a life. And so I got to go to school, check. I have to get this career, check. I got to get married, check. I have to have this house, check. And then we do all of these, and that's what our society, what our parents, what our caregivers, maybe teachers, that's the message that they gave to us when we were raised. And so we say, okay, well, this is the path that I must take. And we're sort of bound, like imprisoned by these expectations. And so we find ourselves living a life and realizing that at some point, it's just not what it's made out to be. This is definitely what was happening to me. I don't know if I've shared a lot of my experience, but I was working a 9-to-5 job at a manufacturer. Yeah, I definitely have talked about this before, but I was I was working a 9-to-5 job at a manufacturing company, and every single day was the same. It was like I wake up, go to this job that I hated. I would have panic attacks at my desk because I just felt like my soul was just like, that was not my soul calling. I felt very, very drained. It was like taking everything out of me. And I just felt like I was, wasting my life. Like, this is not where I was supposed to be. So the way that this manifests, the way that your soul is trying to pry itself into your life could be a panic attack. It could be you going to work every single day and being like, I cannot believe I'm here. I don't feel alive. I don't feel like I contribute. I feel incredibly drained by being at this job. And so that's the way that it showed up for me. I think that it can also show up in the way that maybe it can manifest as an illness or some kind of neuroses, like anxiety, depression. I actually think that suffering anxiety, I've been really trying to look at it as, your anxiety is telling you something, and it's there because it's calling you to a larger life. Even depression is there to call you into a larger life. Whatever you don't like, even conflict. And think about it this way. It's like your soul's calling you to do something else. Your external reality, your ego is like, stay safe. And that creates friction. That creates some kind of war. And that friction is going to show up in the way that maybe you can't sleep, anxiety, that discomfort, that there has to be something else. And if you're not on a path, if you don't have any hope that there is a larger, more meaningful life for you, I think that the general societally accepted thing to do is to give into your addictions. Drink, guzzle massive amounts of coffee or caffeine, watch way too much TV, binge eat, do things that make you comfortable, just to soothe that voice, just to soothe that. And I actually think that every time you choose that comfort over confronting your anxiety and just sitting with it and dealing with it and looking at it and being like, okay, well, what are you trying to tell me? There's power in that. There's power behind your anxiety or the inability to sleep or whatever. And it's trying to tell you something. And if you ignore it by numbing it out and by making it go away through drinking or eating or whatever, all those vices that we sort of talked about, if you ignore that and you're just trying to make yourself comfortable, then you're also ignoring that message that it has for you. You are missing out on that call to the larger life. It's like you have a smoke alarm going off in your house and you just stop it instead of getting rid of the smoke or finding out what the root of the problem is. The path that society has laid out for us, or that our parents laid out for us, the path that we grew up thinking that's the way, that's the safe one. That's the one that's going to keep you comfortable and keep you nice and cozy. And you're going to stay almost sleeping if you continue to choose that path. And I think that a lot of us do. A lot of us in so many ways continue to choose the path of comfort. It's not risky. It's not vulnerable. We have the approval of others. Let's just acknowledge the fact that not having the approval of others, especially people that are in our inner circle, the people that are really close to us, is a very uncomfortable thing. And so when we start to say, like, you know what, this is not really me, I'm going to go on my own new path, what you're doing is you are taking a big risk, because now you are saying, okay, well, I'm going to show my true self. I'm going to take off all these masks and I'm going to be me. But I don't know if this inner circle group of people is going to like that. I don't know if that's going to challenge some people. And I would say from personal experience, that does challenge people. If the more that you step into your authenticity, yes, there are some people who are going to be drawn to that. Actually, I would say that the benefit is way bigger than the risk. The payout is way worth it. But you are going to rock some boats. You are going to, like, some people are going to look at that and be like, you know what, that makes me really uncomfortable. And they're going to push back. They're going to, maybe make fun of you or maybe be sarcastic about it. And it could be really, really hurtful, because these are really close people probably that have known you your whole life, whether that's childhood friends or even your siblings or your parents or aunts, uncles, like family members. These are people who have known you for so long. And as you start stepping into that, if that makes somebody else uncomfortable, their natural reaction to make themselves feel better and to deal with that discomfort is to laugh it off or be like, that's stupid. So you do have to deal with that a little bit. And that's what the risk is, right? That's the risk of stepping into your own self. But I want to say that on the other side of that, though, you get to connect with people who are authentically a match to you. As you take off masks and you're like, hey, this is the real me, you get to connect with other people on that level. And so your social group then sort of starts to make new ties in other places. And just as risky as it might be for certain things, there's always the potential for reward. So you just want to go through some of the things that might crop up for you, like some of the more predominant what ifs, so we can kind of address them and see, okay, well, what's on the other side? So first off, if you create what you're really dying to create and it's well accepted and received, there's a chance that you can connect with somebody else on that level. But while you're creating what you're really dying to create, you're also sort of bearing your soul. This podcast is it's a very vulnerable thing for me to do. And as I've done this, as you start taking steps, and this is the thing, you just got to take one step at a time. And every uncomfortable step, you have to have this mindset. You got to tell yourself, this is making me stronger. This is making me better. This is making me more resilient. As you step outside of comfort, you have to, have the mindset of, this is making me into the person, it's giving me the tools to be the person that I really want to be. And so anytime you create something, if you're trying to create a business or even just like a passion project, and you're trying to make something and it's coming from your soul, it's an act of vulnerability, because if somebody then disagrees with you, or if somebody says, I don't like that, or straight up shuns it and says, that's terrible, that's stupid, writes it off completely, it feels then, because it's so close to you and because it came from you, the authentic you, it feels like a total rejection of you as a person. And that's really uncomfortable. That's really, really, actually, that's really painful. But with that, there's also the chance that you're connecting with other people that adore what you do, that will come to you and say, please never stop. This is really amazing. This is what the world has been waiting for. But it takes sort of like an act of faith to step into that unknown territory of the what if. Okay? You're probably going to tell yourself, as you step into your authentic self, the larger version of yourself, you're probably going to have some story of what if I fail? And that's really uncomfortable for the ego. Every single one of these points, we could say, well, what if nobody likes it? What if I fail? What if I try and it doesn't work out and I've been spinning my wheels the whole time, or I've just been wasting time? When you say it out loud, you can sort of argue, your conscious brain can sort of argue with yourself, and you're like, that sounds so dumb. Like, doesn't it? If you're like, I'm not going to try this because what if I fail? Your conscious brain will be like, yeah, so what if you fail? I think that all of us know we can preach a big game. We can preach a big game about it. And there's a ton of entrepreneurs right now that'll say, if you're not failing, you're not doing enough risky things. You're staying too comfortable and you're probably not growing as much as you want to. And so every time you say something like this, it's really important to honor the words that are coming out of your mouth and then go live it. Try failing. Try it. Because otherwise we sort of go into denial that we even have these thoughts. We'll be like, what if I fail? That's dumb that I would even think that, or that I would say that. And I know the right answer is to try to fail. And so because there's that conflict, we just shove it aside and we say, okay, well, I'm denying that I just won't even talk about it. Okay. So just to get back on track, but for every failure, you do find a way that doesn't work. And so that's the mindset to have. Don't tell yourself it's a failure. Say, okay, well, I tried that and it didn't work. And you get closer and closer and closer to a way that does work with every time that it doesn't. Also, for every failure, it makes your triumph story that much better. It makes it that much more rewarding. And so having that in your mind, yeah, worthwhile things are gonna mean that you fail sometimes. That is it. And if you are thinking, what if I fail? And then you're talking yourself out of it and you're like, okay, well, that's a dumb reason to not try something, but you haven't lived it. That's the experience that you need. You need to go live it. And until you live it, that positive piece of the shadow is just going to stay in the shadow. It's going to stay dormant inside of you. And then it's going to keep calling you and eating at you and showing up in the way that you can't sleep at night, or in the way that you're just restless or dying to get out of your situation, or you're in a rut or whatever. Does that make sense? We have this story of, I'm not going to try it because what if it doesn't work out? What if it doesn't, what if I just start and it doesn't happen? And I think that almost that kind of comes back to a failure, but we tend to apply that to a whole person. Like, if it doesn't work out, then that means that I as an individual didn't work out. I as an individual, like, it says something about me and about how I'm inadequate. And we're so terrified to come to face that. And I would say that everything that I have tried in my past, everything that I have tried, whether it worked out or didn't work out, has never actually been a story that I have told myself that I didn't work out. Does that make sense? And so if that's your story, if you're telling yourself, what if it doesn't work out? And if it doesn't work out, then that means that there's something wrong with me. You have to accept that if you never try, this is what you're going to get. I think we have this idea that there's going to be some distant point in the future where it's all going to be better, where it's all going to be this shining light. And we're like, okay, well, if I just get there, and we keep doing the same things that we've been doing that aren't working, and we have to learn from our mistakes at some point. And actually, I don't want to even call them mistakes. We have to learn the lesson at some point. We have to learn what's working and what's not working. And so I would say here that if you're doing something that's not working, you've got to try something different. And that trying something different might come with, what if it doesn't work out? But you know what? At least you tried. And at least you're moving in that direction. And again, every time you step into something that's a little uncomfortable or step into the unknown, you basically flex that muscle. You flex that ability to try new things, to step into the unknown. And that's what the soul is all about. That's where you're being called to that bigger, more meaningful life. And then lastly, we sometimes have this story of, I might be wasting time. We might say to ourselves, well, what if I try this and it's just this gigantic waste of time? What if I try to build this business that I've been thinking of? Or what if I go into this relationship that I'm kind of uncertain about, but it feels right, but my ego is kind of getting in the way? Or anytime you get into something new like that, there's like this story that says, well, what if it's just a huge waste of time? You have to look at that as a new experience. The only waste of time that, in my opinion, is that we keep reliving yesterday. We keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. You've already lived today because you've lived yesterday. We wake up and our days are exactly the same because we've never stepped into the unknown. We never venture out to say, I'm going to try this new thing, or I'm going to go put myself in this really uncomfortable situation and see what happens and see if it's really as uncomfortable as I've made it seem. Or I'm going to really put myself out there and create this new thing, and I'm just going to start one little bit at a time. And if you have this story of like, it's just a big waste of time, it's going to prevent you from even trying. But if you see it as an experience, a chance to learn something new, a chance to grow, a chance to just collect experiences for nothing else, then nothing really is a waste of time. The only waste of time is to settle into comfort and the mediocre life that you're living that you just don't really want to be living anymore. And so my challenge for you here is that anytime you're telling yourself that it's going to get painful or it's going to get uncomfortable and that's bad, please drop the word bad. Say uncomfortable, say risky, say unknown. Use different language, because when we say bad, we're going to shy away from it. Try to turn every negative situation that you're viewing or anything that's uncomfortable. Can you see that as positive? Flip the script, turn it around, see it as positive. Everything that you're saying that's uncomfortable, or that's going to be a lot of work, or that's going to be really hard, see it as a challenge. See it as something that's making you into somebody better, somebody who you really want to be, who's bringing out the best in you, or who's challenging you to be the highest version of yourself. See it as new experiences. Just try to change your language around it. Okay. So I have, for the remainder of this episode, we're going to talk about some positive shadow archetypal messages. What are you probably being called? Like, what is the overarching theme in a lot of this positive shadow work? And then I'm going to talk about some character traits that are manifestations of the positive shadow. Like, what are you being called to do? And so maybe you can tap into those things on like a daily basis. And then I'm going to talk about how to start to discover some of your positive shadow. Okay, so here are some positive shadow archetypal messages, meaning these are reoccurring messages that usually happen over and over and over again when we are working with a positive shadow. So first off, it's a recovery or discovery of a personal authority. That's probably the number one thing. The ability to say your truth or to disagree, or the ability to have your own voice as separate from the sea of voices. Having a personal authority also means that you have the ability to trust yourself, to go within, to say, I know that everybody else is saying this, but this feels wrong for me. Or to be like, everybody else says this and I actually do agree, but I also consult myself first. That is a very important thing. Having a personal authority or discovering your personal authority means to go with a decision from your gut without needing that approval of others. And I think that I often do this, and maybe even it's to my detriment. I will go with something without consulting other people. And sometimes it's not a great thing. Sometimes I'm like, okay, maybe I should have, asked for a second opinion. If it's ego driven though, it's also going to come with this feeling of writing other people off or looking down on somebody else's opinion because it wasn't, as good as yours for whatever reason. And if it comes from the spirit, it comes with this peace, a solitary decision, but it's also confident and unwavering. And it's like a deep, peaceful knowing that this is what's right for you. Recovering of a personal authority also means to have the ability to go against the grain of what other people think when it's right for you, to be able to stand up, to voice your own opinion, kind of what we just had talked about. Another positive shadow archetypal message is the discovery of your own inner voice and guided system that exists within all of us. These are your conversations with your soul, that ability to feel what's right? And conversations with your soul, they don't necessarily go verbally. It doesn't always come to us in clear language. Conversations with your soul can look like just noticing synchronicities in your life where certain things are showing up over and over and over again. They could look like just a gut feeling or even a feeling in your heart. I would say it's mostly nonverbal. It's way energetic, and it has to do with feeling, right? And this is why tapping into our feeling is so important. And I think a lot of us have kind of detached ourselves from feeling in our adult life. We kind of grow up and we start to say, well, that's not mature. In order to be elated, in order to get really, really excited about something, that's not really like a grown-up thing to do. And so we cut ourselves off from that. We also cut ourselves off from the negative feelings too. We're like, okay, well, I've got to suck it up. I have to be this strong individual and I can't show weakness. And if I cry, then that's showing weakness. And so on the spectrum, the whole spectrum, we stop feeling. We stop feeling excited. We stop feeling emotional. We stop feeling heartbroken and proud and all of these things. And we're just in this middle ground where we're just sort of moseying through life. We're just getting through. And when you tap into your feeling, when you tap into that, what am I feeling right now? And why does that show up? Why is that showing up right now? And getting quiet with yourself and being like, but there's a feeling beneath the feeling sometimes. And you need to ask yourself, what is that feeling beneath the feeling? And then how deep does that feeling go? Does that feeling lead to another feeling? And being in touch with that is where you're going to find your inner voice. Another positive shadow archetypal message is this discovery of personal gifts and talents, or answering this question, what wishes to be expressed through you? This is the summons to create or contribute to the world something that is unique to your soul, something that nobody has ever done in the past. And if it has been done, you don't really know about it. You can draw inspiration from other people. You can draw inspiration from other sources, but what comes through you is uniquely you, and no one else can do it like you. And so what is that? What is it that's trying to come through you and trying to be expressed through you? It's also the courage to create, to voice, to be heard, to live large, despite the naysayers, despite the people who write you off. And kind of like what we talked about before, there are going to be naysayers. They're way less than you would think. And on the other side of it, there are always people that are like, hey, thank you for what you do. You changed my life in a completely different way. And I think that that's like the feeling that all of us want to have. That's what brings meaning. That's what brings purpose to our lives. Another positive shadow archetypal message is the detachment from parental and societal expectations as to what constitutes a successful life. Success is going to be defined on your own terms. And maybe even that means that you decide that success isn't really a word that resonates with you. And that's okay too. Basically though, it's defining that. What does that success look like for you? And maybe sometimes success means, not defining success and being able to lead your life more from your heart and do what moves you instead of what you think needs to be done. Does that make sense? And then also, lastly, there's a message of healing your wounds where they are present. Not everything that comes up in life is a result of a childhood trauma. Not everything is a wound, but sometimes they show up, and it's the courage and the ability to deal with them when they come up and when they are present, and to heal that and to move through that and to face it. So I wanted to talk about some character traits as manifestations of the positive shadow. Like, when we start to work with the positive shadow, what are some character traits that are going to come up and move through us? And I think that, talking about this you might keep these in the back of your mind, and they might show up. So there's 4. There's spontaneity, creativity, passion, and perversity, or the ability to say I am different. And so let's talk about them. But then also you could ask yourself, in my day-to-day, what would be the spontaneous choice? What would be the creative choice here? What would be the passionate choice? What do I really want to do? Or what would be the one thing that would set me apart from somebody else? And when we start to see these character traits and start to move towards those, then we know that we're aligning more and more with our soul or with the spirit. So the underlying question in all of these, though, is where have you been selling your own soul, keeping the peace? Where have you been selling your soul for keeping the peace or belonging or fitting in? And if you can answer that question, you're going to figure out where you haven't been spontaneous, where you're afraid to be creative, where you're afraid to follow your passion, or where you're afraid to, be different. So first off, let's just define some of these. Spontaneity is like the ability to go with the flow, to work with life as it comes to you instead of being a victim to it. The ability to let go of egoic agendas and to trust the spiritual side of things. The ability to wake up someday and be like, okay, well, I wasn't planning on doing this today, but I guess this is what we're doing, or this is where we are. I think that spontaneity is going to show up in most of our lives. Like if you're working a 9-to-5 job, it's not going to be you wake up someday and you're just like, okay, well, I'm going to take an impromptu trip to Brazil. It doesn't usually show up like that, although it could if that is what fits your lifestyle. But I think spontaneity is more the ability to be flexible. Say you're like, I always do this for lunch. It's the ability to be like, okay, well, I'm going to do something different. Or either it's an internal pull, or somebody's like, hey, do you want to go out for lunch with me? And then there you are. It's the ability to let go of your egoic agenda, the one that is like, you have to be doing these things in order to get it done, and to see what arises. Your soul is always going to exist in the unknown, and the ego really likes the known. The ego really likes knowing what's coming, and its comfort, its security, and the soul is going to push you outside of that comfort zone and say, okay, well, you have to do something else, and you just never know. You just never know whether that lunch date would bring you something new, a new opportunity, whatever. And I'm just saying, going out to lunch, it could be going on a bike ride for lunch. It could be going for a run when you don't typically do that, or going for a walk, or whatever, you know what I mean? And I'm just using lunch as an example, but, apply it to your life wherever it works for you. It could be on your weekend. So yeah, so that's spontaneity. Creativity is like the ability to merge seeming unrelated ideas in order to birth something new, in order to create. I can't use the word create because that's part of the definition, right? But it's in order to make something new, or to connect the dots in different ways. And I think that a lot of people think that creation is either it has to be super artistic. It doesn't have to be necessarily artistic. But also I think that people think that creation is like, it's completely original to you. And the truth is that a lot of times creativity is just connecting the dots in a new way. It's just looking at different things and being like, these things that seemingly don't go together, they do go together, and it's in this way, and it's bridging that gap. I think that creativity is a spiritual endeavor, or a positive shadow endeavor because A, it's risky. You're saying something that's new and that probably hasn't been said before. And B, it's allowing the unseen world that exists all around us, the energetic world, to manifest and to come into existence through you. The third one, passion, this character trait of passion. Without passion, we have a lot of unlived life. I think that is like a really good term for it. It's unlived or it's half-lived, you know what I mean? You're like, it's almost like without passion, you're sort of like just walking through life and you're so passive in it. You're just kind of watching it from the sidelines. And passion is what allows us to engage with it. It allows us to, be in it instead of just watching it from the sidelines. And so the question is, where are you withholding your passion because you told yourself it's not safe to express that? You told yourself that in order to be passionate about something and get really excited about it, that's probably not the mature thing to do. Or what would somebody think about your passion? And the truth is that it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks about your passion. It's your life, and nobody's thinking about you as much as you think about you. And so that fear, though, that somebody would judge you for having this passion will prevent you from pursuing it. And so ask yourself, what is the passionate option? How can I choose passion in this? And then lastly, there's perversity, or basically it sounds like, I think that sounds a little more negative than I want it to be, but basically it's this ability to be different, to say, I'm different, I disagree, to find your own voice in that sea of people that are saying one thing and then you're going to say something else. The ability to stand up and say, no, you know what? I have this God-given right to be here and to have my own thoughts about this and to disagree with whatever everybody else is saying. And I'm not saying don't disagree just for the mere ability to disagree. I have dealt with people who just sort of disagree just to disagree. And yeah, that's actually kind of annoying. And it's almost like they want to argue just to argue. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying when you're sitting there and everybody else is saying one thing and you're like, no, I actually have a different experience. It's the ability to voice that different experience, to say, I'm bringing something new to the table. Okay. The last thing that I have for you guys is a couple of practical how to discover, things that you can do to get intimate with your positive shadow. Of course, I couldn't leave you with this episode all about the positive shadow without this. And so, yeah, the first thing that I would say is start getting really, really honest and curious about yourself, to yourself. I think this is a great first step because the more honest you get with yourself, the more you're not going to be able to deny things, the more you're going to have to step into this. Like it's you start to hold yourself accountable to the things that you really want to do. But if you start with yourself, you're not admitting to anybody else, you're not coming out to the world like, this is who I really am. It's not this big moment that is super big and scary. It's just, it starts with you. It starts with you and asking, what do I really want? What is my soul asking me to do? That is a really good question. What do I really want? And I don't think we take enough time generally as a society to answer that question honestly. We sort of look around us and we say, well, they have that and that's what I want. No, it's coming into yourself and being really, really intimate and honest with yourself first. And then the rest sort of snowballs and it just kind of falls into place. So the first thing that I would say is to do this, to get really honest with yourself, is make time every day to listen to your own heart, your own breath. It's so easy to flood every single spare moment that we have, driving, walking, whatever, with a podcast, an audiobook, music, whatever, standing in line. We always, we pull out our phone if there's ever a down moment. And the point is that it doesn't have to be standing in line at a grocery store. It doesn't have to be on a walk, although it could be. But just carve out some time to listen to your own heart every single day. Ask yourself, what would make today amazing? What do I really want today? Get quiet and just listen to yourself. Take a moment to walk or to be or drive with nothing on. Nothing. Not the radio, nothing. And just listen to your own mind. Allow your mind to wander. Figure out where that's going. We just think that there's nothing interesting in our own minds, but that is the most interesting place there is. But you can't hear it if it's constantly flooded with audiobooks or podcasts or music or noise from the outside. Pay attention to synchronicities. 1 is my number, but for you, it could be something completely different. Whenever I see a bunch of 1s, that's my path. That's where I know either I'm on my path, or it's a call to my path, or it's a call to return to my path. And it's different in every situation, but pay attention to these reoccurring things that happen for you. It could be a reoccurring conversation about something. It could be the perfect time that you were thinking about a friend and then they decided to call you. Whatever that is, it could be a ladybug. Maybe you always see ladybugs or dragonflies or whatever, a specific number, a topic coming up and a conversation over and over again. Pay attention to those synchronicities. That's the universe trying to pry into your life and be like, pay attention to me. And then lastly, of course, pay attention to your dreams. What is your dream trying to tell you, and try to see them symbolically? I could do a whole episode about dreams, and they're really, really interesting. But if you just take the time to pay attention to them, to write them down, because they will escape you so much faster than you think. The first thing in the morning, if you have a dream, just write it down and then come back to it later. And if you need help with that, I sort of dabble in some dream work. So you can find me on social media or whatever, but there's that too. So I have just a series of questions, and hopefully they help you kind of tap into that positive shadow. First of all, where can you not accept a compliment? In compliments, somebody else is seeing something in you that you haven't accepted in yourself. And ask yourself why. If you were to own that piece of yourself, what are the implications? If somebody says, you are absolutely beautiful, what is it about that feeling of being beautiful that intimidates you? What is that about that feeling of beauty that makes you uncomfortable? Once you find out what's beneath that fear, you can kind of see where that's controlling your life or keeping you in a prison or keeping you away from this larger life that you're being drawn towards. The second question I have is, where are you afraid to disagree, and who are you afraid to disagree with? And what about that is intimidating to you? Whoever or whatever you are afraid to disagree with also controls you, right? It has power over you in a way. And this is exactly where you'll run into that whole selling yourself in order to keep the peace, selling your soul in order to keep the peace. And usually that doesn't even pan out anyway. You don't keep the peace and you sell your soul, so nobody wins. So that fear of disagreeing, standing up, that behind that is your positive shadow. That's where you, the authentic you, is trying to emerge, but your ego is keeping you from emerging, from growing, because you're afraid to disagree. What did you used to do as a child that you absolutely loved doing that you have stopped doing in your adult life? And why did you stop doing that? When we're children, we're so pure and innocent, and our interests are completely uncontaminated by the wider adult world of expectations and the shoulds. And when we're children, we can just be and pursue anything that piques our interest. And as we grow, we shut ourselves off from that. And so could you go back to that? If you were a kid and you loved painting or drawing or writing, and could you tap into that again? That is where your positive shadow is going to come through. And I think that it starts to come through. Whatever's wanting to be expressed through us kind of starts to come through as a child. And then a lot of times we shut ourselves off through our traumas or whatever, and then we never come back to it. And so in order to come back to it, could that be the launching ground for what that's supposed to blossom into? What are you drawn to, and what makes you feel most alive when you're alone, but then maybe you stifle it around others? I think a lot of times we stifle our passions. This kind of goes back to passion. We stifle our passions because we think that maybe it's not mature, somebody will judge us, or our passion is not the same as somebody else's passion, or our passion is wrong, or it's wrong to be different. But I think that whatever makes you feel alive, whatever your heart penetrates, like straight to your heart, that's like a gateway that we've shut ourselves off from in our adult life. And a lot of times, like I was saying before, we stop feeling, on so many levels, we stop feeling joy, we stop feeling sad because we think that it's not mature, or it's not hard, or it's weakness. We put all these negative labels on it. And if you could just start doing one thing, like start to feel, start being drawn to these things and start pursuing that. Shut off the TV and start doing these things that make you proud of your work, but then also like that you would just do for the sake of doing. There's no end point. There's no goal to be reached. You would just do it just for the sheer fact of doing it. That's where you're going to find your flow. That's where you're going to find, your best work. That's where spirit can really move through you, because your ego is just completely aside and you can just be in it. Lastly, what are you afraid of? Wherever you're afraid of something, that's going to show up in several different areas of your life. If you're afraid of public speaking, you're going to keep your voice stifled. You're going to shield your voice, and then you're not going to be able to disagree with a family member or with somebody else, or you're going to be thinking that you should start your own business, or you want to go on social media and share some of your opinions, and you're not going to be able to do that. You're going to be in your relationship, and your partner's going to, sort of walk all over you because you're not allowing yourself to speak up. It's going to show up in every single place in your life, and then it's going to just imprison you this whole time. So whatever you're afraid of, on the other side of that fear is your positive shadow. That is becoming. That is, a life of meaning. That is triumph. That is success. That is who you are meant to be. And as long as your ego keeps your voice quiet or stifled, or keeps your fear running your life, you're never going to step into that person. You're never going to step into that positive shadow. Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I really love talking about the positive shadow because it is this call to the larger life. That is the whole point that I do everything. I know sometimes I focus a lot on what blocks us, and you have to address the blocks in order to get to the other side. But the other side is this more meaningful life. It's not a life without struggle. It's not a life without pain. It's not a life without suffering. In fact, as you go into that, you're almost certainly going to have those things. But here's the deal. Your pain and your suffering and your struggle are also showing up right now without the positive. And the question is your struggle, is your pain, is your suffering going to be worthwhile and meaningful? Or is it going to just keep you in this, settled into this mediocre life that you don't really want? All right, you guys, thank you so much for joining me. I know this is a bit longer of an episode, but I will see you next time. If you enjoyed this episode, I would invite you to subscribe, share it with someone you know, and leave an honest rating or review. You can also connect with me through Instagram at spiritmind.body, through YouTube, or my website. Links to all of these can be found in the show notes below. This work is not easy and requires tremendous self-reflection, grit, and a willingness to be misunderstood, and for that, I honor every single one of you for showing up for your authentic self. Until next time.